Go looking for dinner. John Rothstein here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page with you here on a fabulous Monday in the month of May. Later in this show, we'll be joined by VCU head coach Phil Martelli Jr. Also, want you to hit the subscribe button in the YouTube page right now. Want you to also leave some comments in the chat. We will get to your thoughts and your perspective on college basketball later in this show. There's tons to get to, and also just want to set the table a little bit for what's coming here over the next weeks and months. Over the next weeks and months, we're going to continue to drive out content for this show. We are going to continue to set the table and visit with some of the biggest names in college basketball. So stay tuned to social media for more promos for that in the days and the weeks to come. We also, as I transition to CBS right now for my podcast work, are going to get things all set up from an audio perspective as well, so you can listen to us in the car and when you're not in a situation to watch us. So all those things will be taken care of in the days and the weeks to come. But don't you worry about us pounding out content for you, the college basketball fan, as often as we can. I'm aiming for 52 weeks out of the calendar year. And now let's get to three big things. The first big thing I want to get to is some news that broke at the end of last week. I reported that on Friday, Duke and Texas on November 4th in Charlotte at the Spectrum Center are going to play a non-conference game. That's the second day of the 25-26 regular season. And then also on opening night, there is a mega doubleheader at T-Mobile in Las Vegas. We have a matchup of Florida, the defending national champions, going up against Arizona. And we also have Villanova in what will be playing its first game under Kevin Willard, going head-to-head with BYU and A.J. DeBanza, who's expected to be the number one overall pick in the 2025 NBA draft. So in the first 2 days of the 25-26 college basketball season, on May the 5th, we already know that we have Florida against Arizona in Las Vegas, two teams who should start next season in the top 15. And then we have Villanova, its first game with Kevin Willard as head coach, taking on BYU, a team that I have right now in my Rothstein 45, ranked at number 5. This is what the sport needs. This is how the sport is going to separate itself, coming shot out of a cannon during the first week of the regular season. And then on that Tuesday, November 4th, we have Duke, we have Texas in what will be Sean Miller's first game as head coach of the Longhorns. The Longhorns right now, right about at the back end of the top 25 of my Rothstein 45. Duke, obviously, a consensus top 10 team to start next season. So right now, and we still have a couple more, obviously, months before the start of the next season, and there's opportunities to add to the schedule, we know we have 3 monster games in the first 2 days of the 25-26 college basketball season. The second big thing I want to get to, and it's something that is in line with the first thing, we have to give Jon Scheyer credit for what he's doing with Duke's non-conference schedule. Now, Jon Scheyer was very aggressive when he first got the Duke job at scheduling marquee competition. He did a home-and-home series right out of the gate with Arizona. That was something that obviously brought a lot of sizzle to those college campuses. But now we're in a situation where Jon Scheyer continues to elevate things as Duke's head coach. Next season, this is what's already on the books for Duke outside of the ACC. You have one game in the ACC-SEC Challenge. That game's going to be against one of the best teams, obviously, in the SEC. You're at Michigan State in a return game from the 2020 Champions Classic that was played at Cameron Indoor Stadium. You're playing Michigan in February in Washington, D.C., which is the site, obviously, for the East Regionals of the NCAA tournament. You're at Army on Veterans Day. You're also going to take on Kansas in the Champions Classic at Madison Square Garden. You have the Texas game I mentioned. And then on Thanksgiving night in Chicago on CBS, you're going against John Calipari in Arkansas. That is a monster schedule by Jon Scheyer and Duke to play the best of the best outside of the ACC. Now, part of it is the fact that the ACC has been meager the last couple of years, that the ACC has left a lot to be desired the last couple of years. But kudos to Jon Scheyer for playing the schedule outside of the ACC that he currently has on tap right now for 25-26. Just looking at things right now, Duke will probably play 6 or so games against top 35, top 30 level competition outside of the ACC. And even though Jon Scheyer is obviously the one now of the blue blood programs that's setting the table for these power conference programs that are blue blood level to play elite competition, I would be remiss if I did not give credit to Tommy Lloyd at Arizona. Tommy Lloyd is another head coach that has been very, very aggressive out of the gate scheduling. And you look right now on the screen right now, and you see what Arizona currently has teed up for next season. Florida, the opener that we talked about. UCLA at Intuit Dome in Los Angeles. At UConn as part of a home-and-home series. Auburn at home in the start of a home-and-home series. And Alabama in Birmingham. These are all marquee games to start the next college basketball season. Now, I want to go back to Duke in the ACC because I think one big storyline now, and I want you to get in the chat. I want you to send me your questions right now on anything that's on your mind on college basketball. Hit the subscribe button. Obviously, engage with us. Get things going. I'm going to get to your comments and everything here in just a second. One storyline that's not getting enough attention. One storyline that is not, in my opinion, receiving the attention that it deserves from a national perspective is the fact that the ACC is improving as a conference. Now, it remains to be seen, obviously, how improved the ACC is next season. But I will say this. On the heels of the last 2 years of the ACC, on the heels of a conference that, in my opinion, for the last 2 years, got a team into the first 4 that was not worthy of being in the NCAA tournament, the ACC is quietly now being in a situation where it is gradually getting better as a league. And if you look back to 2024, let's look at the ACC. Duke, Carolina, and Clemson were all comfortably in the NCAA tournament. NC State in 2024 got in the NCAA tournament by winning the ACC tournament. And then you had Virginia make the first 4, and they were blown out by Colorado State in a game that was Tony Bennett's final game as Virginia's head coach. And then last year, you look at the ACC. Duke, Louisville, and Clemson were locks for the NCAA tournament. And then Carolina made the first 4, beat San Diego State, and then lost to Ole Miss. If you look at the ACC now, and you look at the makeup of this conference, Duke and Louisville are going to start next season as consensus top 15 teams in college basketball. Duke obviously brings in a great recruiting class. Duke obviously brings back a couple of key players from last season, headlined by Tyrese Proctor and Isaiah Evans. Louisville did tremendous work in the transfer portal, landing Ryan Conwell from Xavier and Isaac McNeely from Virginia. Those 2 teams are in the top 15 to start next season, and that's a consensus duo of top 15 teams. Meanwhile, though, you look at some of the other programs in this conference. North Carolina, to me, did nicely in the transfer portal. It's a little bit of a reverse, in my opinion, for North Carolina, because North Carolina comes in next year with more proven commodities up front, with Henry Visar, with Jaron Stevenson, the transfers from Arizona and Alabama, respectively. Last year, it was a perimeter-heavy team with R.J. Davis, Elliot Cadeau, and Seth Trimble. Carolina does bring back Seth Trimble, who should be pound for pound, inch for inch, one of the best guards in the ACC. But Carolina, to me, is a top 25 team to start next season. Now, 2 new head coaches that have made immediate strides in the ACC are Miami's Jay Lucas and NC State's Will Wade. Let's start with Jay Lucas. He's never coached a game yet as a head coach. And that obviously is something that we're going to be, monitoring moving forward. Because until somebody coaches their own team, you just don't know. But we do know this. Jay Lucas can put a roster together. and he can put a roster together at a really, really high level, at least on paper. Trey Donaldson at point guard from Michigan. Drew Washington at the 2 from New Mexico. You also have to look at the fact that Shelton Henderson, who was committed to Duke, is going to now be playing for the University of Miami. And then up front, we have a scenario where Malik Reneau, grizzled veteran from Indiana, is going to be Miami's power forward, most likely. And then it's Ernest Uday, who transferred from TCU, is going to be the 5-man for the Hurricanes. That is a top 30 starting 5 if you're Miami, at least from a projection perspective, with Donaldson, Washington, Henderson, and then obviously Malik Reneau and Ernest Uday. Now, what about NC State? What about Will Wade? Well, if you're the NC State fan right now, you are in a little bit of a holding pattern because NC State has been linked to Memphis transfer PJ Haggerty for the past couple of weeks. And from everything I'm gathering, that is the likely landing spot for Memphis transfer PJ Haggerty, who will enter next season as one of the top guards in college basketball and probably one of the top 5 or 6 players in college basketball, depending on what happens with the early entry deadline for the 2025 NBA draft and who comes back or not. But if Will Wade lands PJ Haggerty as expected, now all of a sudden you have a perimeter at NC State of Michigan State transfer Trey Holloman, PJ Haggerty, who will start next season as a first-team All-American, and Houston transfer Terrence Arsenault. That, to me, is a nucleus in place that's going to be good enough to get NC State to the NCAA tournament. So I think as long as PJ Haggerty winds up at NC State, the ACC is going to enter next season with 5 top 30 teams: Duke, Louisville, Carolina, NC State, and Miami. And I also think Virginia is going to be significantly better under Ryan Odom. The ACC for years was the flagship conference of college basketball. It's taken a sabbatical. I'm not saying it's back from sabbatical, but I will say this. The ACC, as long as NC State gets a commitment from PJ Haggerty, I think the ACC will enter next season with 5 top 30 teams. Miami's Jay Lucas, NC State's Will Wade, both making major strides to improve the talent bases of those programs. When we return, want to get to your thoughts on the ACC and any other thoughts you have in college basketball. Get in the chat, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. We want to hear from you. VCU's Phil Martelli Jr. later in the show, but right now, it's your thoughts, your questions. John Rothstein here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page.
The crowd loves champions. Gladiator 2 is an epic spectacle. Remarkable! To amuse you is my only wish.
The glory is yours, not mine.
Very good. Gladiator 2, rated R, now streaming on Paramount+.
All right, welcome back. John Rothstein here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. Want you to get involved, obviously, in this chat as we take your questions. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Our first question comes from Coach Hastings. And John, what's a non-league matchup that you would want to see that doesn't already exist? Well, I want to see this, and this is something I've felt for a long time. I think that college basketball is at its best when we have the best brands in the sport playing each other head-to-head. And I have felt that the game that has had to happen in college basketball is a multi-year series between UConn and Duke. It's something when I came up on this beat, I thought that UConn and Duke were clearly the 2 best programs in the sport 20 years ago. And now Duke has obviously maintained things at an elite level under John Shire, and Dan Hurley has elevated UConn to back-to-back national championship status in 23 and 24. I would love to see, if you're asking me what is my dream non-conference scenario, I would love to see UConn play Duke in a 3-year series, 1 game at Gamble Pavilion, 1 game at Cameron Indoor Stadium, and another at Madison Square Garden. Cowboys and More wants to know, John, if Carter Bryant stays in the NBA draft, who do you think Arizona should replace him with in the transfer portal? Well, I'll say this. I am forecasting right now Arizona to not have Carter Bryant back next season. I always forecast things for next season like this. If a player is projected to be a first-round pick in the NBA draft, I always project that team to move on without him. So the way I'm looking at things right now, I have Toby Awaka slated in at power forward for Arizona, and I'm forecasting Arizona to not have Carter Bryant next season. And with that said, Arizona is still 12th in my rankings for top 45 teams. Keep the questions going here in the chat. Let's see who else. Kyle Yost wants to know, John, what are realistic expectations for BYU and AJ DeBanza? Look, I think if you're a BYU fan now and you went to the Sweet 16 this past year without a talent like this, the goal and the realistic expectations for BYU is to go to a Final Four. And I don't even think that's anything that anybody should, blink at. You've got Baylor transfer Rob Wright, who's going to be one of the best sophomore point guards in college basketball and maybe one of the best point guards in college basketball this year. Richie Saunders is a proven all Big 12 player. And then you have a player in DeBanza who's going to be right there and the likely candidate to be the number one overall pick in the 2026 NBA draft. And this goes back to something I talked about last week and in other episodes, how things have leveled out with NIL. And what I mean by that is now you have a program like BYU. Now you have a program like St. John's. Now you have a program like Texas Tech regularly getting top 5, 10 teams in the country. Because now players don't have to go certain places to, again, get the type of spotlight and platform that they used to get. You don't need to go to a blue blood program. Rob wants to know, John, your thoughts on Buzz Williams at Maryland. Look, I said this on this platform. I said this on other platforms. Nothing Buzz Williams does surprises me in terms of how quickly he can build a roster. Buzz Williams, to me, has usurped the initial expectations for what people had from him at Maryland with what he's done in building a roster. I think there's a real legitimate chance that Maryland makes the NCAA tournament in its first year under Buzz Williams. John wants to know, John, is St. John's legit top 5 or is it Pitino hype? Look, I can't say this enough times. If you are a St. John's fan right now, you are living in the golden era of St. John's basketball. What's happening right now? St. John's getting the number 1 transfer portal class in America. St. John's becoming a 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. St. John's being a Big East tournament champion and a Big East regular season champion. Stuff like this may not ever happen again in your lifetime, where St. John's is a perennial contender to be ranked at the top of the polls and be in contention for top seeds in the NCAA tournament. St. John's has got to find a way, and this is obviously directly related to Rick Pitino, has to find a way to mold Ian Jackson into a point guard. But beyond that, St. John's, man for man, pound for pound, inch for inch, is going to have the most talented roster in college basketball. I'm not saying that St. John's is going to be the best team, but if you look at the roster and you look at the talent base, unequivocally, St. John's will have the most talented roster in next season entering opening day on November 3rd, which we talked about, has much more juice because you have the Arizona-Florida doubleheader. You've got then the Villanova-BYU matchup. And on the 4th of November, you got Duke and you got Texas in Sean Miller's first game as the Longhorns head coach. Now, another first-year head coach that comes from great pedigree is Phil Martelli Jr. He's the new head coach at VCU, and we visit with him coming up next.
She knows, and I know she knows.
And we now welcome in the new head coach of VCU, Phil Martelli Jr. And Phil, welcome. What is it like to be introduced as the VCU head coach?
Yeah, it's still a little bit surreal. I keep saying I've dreamt big dreams in this. I wanted to be a Division I head coach since I was probably 11, 12 years old. But to be at a program that is one of the top, probably 20, 25, 30 jobs in the country is still a little hard to believe, especially, it was not a meteoric rise as an assistant, but then in these last 2 or 3 years, it's kind of felt like that. So, I still pinch myself. I still walk into this facility every day going like, this is pretty crazy.
Well, that rolls into my next question. 2 years ago, you were not a Division I head coach, and now you're the head coach at VCU. How do you explain your own meteoric rise as a head coach?
Well, I've been around really good people. I was around great people at Bryant, Bill Smith, our athletic director there, Ross Cattell, our president, Ron Makeley, the previous president. I mean, those people set me up for success. And then you factor in having great players, which we did, the Earl Timberlakes, the Sharif Gross Bullocks, the Rafael Pinzones, and, go down the line, Barry Evans, all those guys, that was, our success was because of them. And then just being ready, like you never know when that time's going to come. And I've been fortunate to work for some really good people and work with some really good people that, put me in those positions every day to have to make decisions and have to think like a head coach for at least the last probably 10 years. So then when that opportunity came and that day came, just kind of ready to roll with it.
Could you imagine undertaking all the responsibility that you're undertaking now at VCU if you didn't have the experience for a couple of years of running your own program at Bryant?
No, I don't think I think you have to go through the steps that you go through. And that was part of it, right? Like making those decisions on that level, having to deal with the things you deal with on that level. And then, okay, now this is a different beast. Like your time is pulled in many different directions. Staff wise, there was 4 of us at Bryant, in a tiny little office. Now we have, I have to get on a motorized scooter some days to just go down the hall to go see somebody because that, spread out. But, it's a lot of different people. You're managing different people. But at the end of the day, the managing people part stays the same. And I think staying true to who you are is a big deal. And these last 2 years at Bryant really helped me kind of solidify who I am and who I always wanted to be as a coach.
So you lose to Michigan State in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and then a couple of days later, you get the VCU job. What happened in between?
Yeah, it was, man, I wish I even knew. I feel like I blinked and I was on a plane to Richmond with my family. So we lost. We came back that Saturday, flew back. There were some other opportunities and people that were talking to me that I was supposed to set up meetings with. So it was kind of doing that. It was really, to be honest with you, I was focused on Bryant, and the transfer portal was opening Monday. There were some guys we knew were going to be in there that I'm like, all right, we need to make sure we're setting up times to connect with them. And really that was my focus. And then, really what the future would look like at Bryant, obviously looking for contract extensions and improvements to the program and things like that. So I was really putting those lists together that Saturday and Sunday. And then I was sitting, waiting for a meeting up there with my athletic director. And I got a text that said, be ready to go here. You could be a serious candidate. And before I knew it, I was, and they were flying up to see me, and the news broke that I took the job without even ever having met with them yet. So that flipped my Tuesday night upside down. But by Wednesday, late morning, early afternoon, it was solidified.
So when you become the VCU head coach, you join a very, very special fraternity because this job has been a launch pad for so many special head coaches: Jeff Capel, Anthony Grant, Shaka Smart, Will Wade, Mike Rhodes, now Ryan Odom, who's the head coach at Virginia. How many of those guys have you reached out to, and what's the dialogue been like among the former VCU head coaches?
Yeah, I haven't had enough time to get extensive conversations with them. That's something that's been high on my list. I feel like every week, and then with trying to get guys to come back and then recruit a team and all that. But I've had, some dialogue with Ryan, more probably with him, with Mike, we had talked, Shaka, I had some text conversation with him. Will I ran into at the Final Four and told him that I'd want to talk at some point in time. So, I haven't had a ton of time, but I'm hoping that that's coming up here soon because I want to get all those guys, and Jeff Capel and Anthony Grant, although obviously in league, I'm sure Coach Grant will not be as forthcoming with the secrets, but guys that I have had tremendous respect for, that not just have won, but have done this in a way that's respectable and classy and all those kind of things. And that's what I'm excited. I'm excited to kind of connect with them and just say, look, what are your thoughts? What was good? What wasn't while you were here? And, try to make this the best it can be.
Phil, your father was obviously Phil Martelli Jr. when you were growing up, or Phil Martelli Sr. when you were growing up, and a very, very successful head coach at St. Joe's. And, you're his son, and a lot of people look at you and say, well, this is somebody whose father was an institution, this profession, but you haven't been handed anything in your own quest to be a head coach. And as a matter of fact, less than a decade ago, you were out of college basketball and you were an assistant in the G League. What was that period like?
Well, that was an interesting time because we win the CAA championship at Delaware. The next 2 years were tumultuous is probably the best word I can put it. More off the court with just some kind of hierarchy stuff that was above my head. And then it ultimately leads to us getting fired. And that was hard because, you go through that process and I look back on that and say that really was one of the best things that could happen to me. I just learned so much about the business from being fired and going through that, kind of learning like this is the real part of the business, right? Like it's easy to go and we win and we do this and we do that, but to learn like who your true friends are in the business. There's people that I thought were real friends that I never heard from, and there was guys that I barely knew that I heard from all the time. So that opened my eyes to that part of the business. But it really turned out to be a blessing because the opportunities I had were not great as an assistant. Places that one coach was on his last legs, another was just geographically didn't make sense. So I did at that time the D League, now the G League. So that set me up for this day and age of college basketball. One, it gave me a PhD in X's and O's. I mean, that was like a whole different level. The things we were teaching and talking about was at another level from anything that I had been around. But two was the roster management piece, which is very much like that. What we went through is very much what it is now in college basketball. Quick decisions, quick evaluations. How's this guy fit? Does he make sense? I tell people all the time, we played 50 games. We had 31 different guys play for us in 50 games. So getting guys acclimated and trying to build a bond quickly really set me up. And the connections I made there, through other people I worked with, through NBA personnel, agents, former players, the whole thing, I'm still using those today.
Well, adversity, no doubt, in life reveals character, and that's obviously what you went through during that period when you were out of college basketball. And I know it was very, very emotional for your family a couple of years ago when your father was removed from his position at St. Joe's. And I'm curious, now that you're a head coach in the Atlantic 10, what is it going to be like for you emotionally to be leading another program in the upcoming season against St. Joe's, which isn't only obviously the place that your father used to coach, but it's your alma mater as well?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought much about that specifically, but being in the Atlantic 10 means so much to me. When I was growing up, Atlantic 10 basketball was college basketball, know, and yeah, there's people that follow the Big East at that time, or the ACC, and those conferences were great. But to me, I was like the Atlantic 10, those moments, those games, whether it be on campus or be at the Palestra for the A10 tournament when that was there, or the Spectrum, I mean, I go back, some of my fondest memories in college basketball are those games. And you will know this. There's probably a lot of your listeners that don't know this, but I go back to the days of Penn State in the Atlantic 10 and Rutgers in the Atlantic 10 and West Virginia in the Atlantic 10. And not to mention obviously Temple and their run and UMass and their run, like growing up with that and seeing that literally from the sideline every day gives me goosebumps. Like I think about those days and with such fondness and have such admiration for all those coaches that came before, all those players that came before, that did special things in the Atlantic 10.
Well, that brings me now to my next point, because the Atlantic 10 just 11 years ago had 6 teams in the NCAA tournament, and 12 years ago in 2013 had 5 teams in the NCAA tournament. But the league now has struggled and has had to scratch and claw to get multiple teams in the NCAA tournament. There's a good chance if VCU did not win the Atlantic 10 tournament title game that it would have missed the NCAA tournament. How in this climate does the Atlantic 10 get fixed?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one that a lot of people have been trying to answer over the years, these last couple of years. I don't know how the league as a whole gets fixed. I just know from our perspective that we have to do everything in our power. One, we have to recruit a certain level to make sure that we have a chance to have an at-large if we don't win the league. And we have to schedule that way and have to know the formula and go through it. And we have in painstaking fashion. We've broken down everything. And they had done this prior to me getting here so that, we just have added to going through and figuring out, okay, the teams like us that have gotten, those at-larges, what did they do? What are the things we can do? Okay, who fits in these different buckets, and try to schedule that way, to make sure that we're there, and it comes down to having a good enough team and then, putting yourself in that position. And I think they've done a pretty decent job of that here, and that's something that we want to try and continue to do.
So for 25-26 for your non-league schedule, you got 3 games in the battle for Atlantis. You got New Mexico at home. Is there anything else of significance on the docket for VCU in year 1 under Phil Martelli Jr.?
We're getting close. I can't officially say it yet, but there's a chance that we're playing a former coach here who may happen to be a new coach in the ACC. We may be locking them in. Nothing is contracted yet, but seems like they're gracious enough to play us. So, we'll get that locked in. We're going to have, by all accounts, our first game in Atlantis will be a pretty high level game. And then, working on it. We got a couple neutral site opportunities, a couple potential road Power 4 game opportunities, trying to add, again, back to that formula, trying to add those quad 1 games. Unfortunately, we don't get enough of them in conference play, but if we can add them in the non-conference. So that's really been a focus. And then, rounding out the home schedule, we have American at home, and we'll get a few more locked in as we go along.
Now, as part of the VCU head coach buyout, if a head coach leaves VCU as part of the buyout, that coach is required to come back and play a game. Mike Rhodes was obviously the head coach before Ryan Odom. He's the head coach at Penn State right now. Are there any plans to play Penn State next season in Richmond?
I don't know that. That one's over my head, so I don't know. That was being dealt with, I think, at an administrative level, so I don't know that for sure.
Okay. Well, Phil Martelli Jr. shedding some light here on the VCU non-conference schedule. Phil, when you look at the roster that you've put together so far at VCU, and I know it's still only May, what are your initial impressions?
Yeah, I mean, we targeted certain guys. We always talk about trying to be intentional going into the portal. I don't want to be diving into that transfer portal pool. It's so crowded now. When we started doing it years ago, it was, you could maneuver in there, and now you dive in there and everybody's in there. So the thing that I always say is I don't want to be in there playing Marco Polo. I don't want to dive in that pool, close my eyes, yell Marco. All right, John yells Polo. Okay, he's our guy, and just piece it together that way. Like, I want to be intentional with what we're doing and who we're taking and how it fits. Efficiency really matters to me. So all the guys that we've signed, fit that mold. It was, okay, we need this position. Okay, who's the most efficient offensive and defensive player we can get at that position? Okay, boom, and then we were able to do that across the board. So, I think we have a lineup that can really guard, 1 through 5. We were very switchable last year at Bryant. We can do some of that. I don't know if we'll do exactly that. A lot of that will be dictated by the personnel, but we have a lineup that I think can really guard, and I think we have offensive pieces that really fit together well in our system and then amongst each other.
Now, 3 of the guys that you took out of the transfer portal, Ahmed Noel from UConn, Jadrian Tracy from Oregon, and also Tyrell Ward from LSU. These guys are all former top 100 prospects who played at the power conference level. How much could that be a philosophy moving forward for VCU? Because you have the brand, you have obviously the NIL resources to attract maybe the power conference freshman or sophomore that didn't get the same bite of the apple that he was hoping to get at the higher level.
Yeah, I like that model. Similar to what we did at Bryant. We tried to find those lower end rotation Atlantic 10 guys, the Barry Evans, Rafael Pinzon came from St. John's, Earl Timberlake came from Memphis. Like, find those guys that, all right, aren't quite getting the opportunity they want at that level. They come down, and not just us. There was other teams in the America East that did that and had guys that had a lot of success. So, that's something for me and for us as our program. Like, we'll look at that, and because of our geographic location, you have those DMV guys that want to come back to the area. Maybe they don't want to be right there in DC, but they can come back here. You're an hour and a half from home, playing high level basketball, with an incredible, fan base and support. So those things will continue. That's something that we will look at, especially guys that are coming from winning. All those guys came from winning programs, came from excellent coaching. So they know what it takes. They know what it takes to play on that level. They understand the commitment. They understand the expectation. They understand that the eyeballs are always on you, which they are here. And they don't get flustered by that.
Phil, final thing, we've obviously seen more and more the focus be on programs and power conferences in this climate of college athletics, but there are a certain number of programs, Gonzaga, St. Mary's, VCU, Memphis, who stand out outside, the power conference structure. Obviously throw San Diego State in there as well. How do you keep VCU elite in this current climate?
Well, we have to continue to win. We have to continue to put ourselves on the biggest stages, and not shy from that, and whatever that looks like. If it's, hey, there's an opportunity to play on national TV against, one of the best teams in the country, yeah, we're there, and doing those things, again, continuing to recruit at a high level, but continuing to put yourself out there, in those situations, and then continuing to win, like that. Every school you mentioned wins. They go to the NCAA tournament year after year after year. So that's something that we have to make sure that is a staple, and it's not just they were good 5 years ago. And then, no, we have to be, continuously good and be consistent with that.
Phil, congratulations on the gig. Great visiting with you. Thrilled for your success. And as always, look forward to staying connected along the way.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you.
That's it. That's VCU head coach Phil Martelli Jr. I'm John Rothstein. We'll be back after this.
Get ready.
Wait a second. I thought we were going tubing.
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and Knuckles are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
And everyone loves it.
Every adventure.
Just try to keep up.
Every face-off.
This ends now.
And every moment that will have you saying,
Where have you been? My entire life!
It's showtime!
All 3 Sonic the Hedgehog movies and the entire Sonic universe are now streaming on Paramount Plus.
All right, John Rothstein back here on the CBS Sports College Basketball YouTube page. We are now going to get into 3 good nuggets before we put a bow on this show. It was announced last week that St. John's in Kentucky will play on December 20th at the CBS Sports Classic. The 2025 edition will take place at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. This game obviously is a substitute. UCLA was supposed to play Kentucky in the event, but now it will be Rick Pitino and St. John's playing Kentucky in Atlanta. I got to tell you, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a proud CBS employee, I think you could make the case that the matchup between St. John's and Kentucky next season is the most highly anticipated game that we are going to see during the non-conference portion of the schedule. You have two teams that are going to be in the top 11 or 12 to start the season. You have Rick Pitino at St. John's going against his former team in Kentucky, and not just going against his former team in Kentucky, but going against his former captain, Mark Pope, who was a part of that 96 team that was one of the best teams that I have seen in my lifetime. St. John's obviously now being back as a national brand on CBS the Saturday before Christmas against Kentucky, who along with Duke, and UConn, one of the blue blood programs of the sport. I'll say it again. I think you can make the case that St. John's, Kentucky will be the most highly anticipated non-conference game that we will see during the 25-26 season. Gonzaga added a veteran perimeter addition on Friday when Arizona State transfer Adam Miller committed to play for the Bulldogs. This, to me, fills a major void for Mark Few's squad. There was an open spot on the perimeter. Colgate transfer Braden Smith is expected to obviously have a major impact. You can say the same about Virginia transfer Jalen Worley. Now you add Adam Miller in that other spot. The lefty has seen a lot of college mileage over the last 4 or 5 years. He was at Illinois. He was at LSU. He was also obviously most recently at Arizona State. And then you have one of the better 4-5 combinations up front in the sport with Graham Ike and Braden Huff. Gonzaga, to me, a consensus top 20 to 25 team to start next season. And then another note, not as highly anticipated as the St. John's Kentucky game, but according to a source, Notre Dame and Ohio State are finalizing an agreement to play a home-and-home series next season starting in Columbus. There'll be a game in South Bend during the 26-27 season. Notre Dame is another one of those teams that I talked about earlier in the show out of the ACC that has a chance to be significantly better next season. Notre Dame, as of today, just looking at the Rothstein 45, which I post each and every day on Twitter, Notre Dame is a team that's in the top 45 at number 44. You have Marcus Burton and Braden Shrewsbury back in that backcourt. You also have Keba Jai up front. There's a strong incoming class. And this is going to be a big year for Micah Shrewsbury, who, again, is going to be operating in a much improved ACC conference. Louisville and Duke, consensus top 15 teams to start next season. Carolina and Miami right now comfortably in the top 30. And NC State right behind, as long as the Wolfpack can secure Memphis transfer PJ Haggerty out of the transfer portal. Haggerty, a second-team All-American last season. We'd like to thank VCU head coach Phil Martelli Jr. for joining us here. I'm John Rothstein. We will be back later in the week with another episode, so stay tuned to my social media for all the programming information that you need. And remember, this is only May.